Hello there everybody, Sam Strange here, welcome back to the railway and welcome to yet another review, this time of another Bachmann locomotive. So, Dapol's brand new tooled Great Western 43XX Mogul is due to be released this year in late spring or early summer, sometime like that. They've been showing samples of them in the latest exhibitions and they're looking absolutely amazing. So in readiness for the release of those, I thought why not take a look at some of the 43XX Moguls that are on the market already. Loads of people have asked me to review these anyway, so the loco of today is going to be this. This is the Bachmann 43XX. And as you can see just by the packaging really, obviously this is a slightly older model. Now I personally don't mind that, I quite like older models myself, I enjoy using them I suppose more than anything else because they tend not to be too fragile, so if you want to play trains this is quite a good thing to have. However, obviously, I don't think it would be unreasonable to call this 20 years old. I'm not 100% sure how old exactly, but as you can tell, yes, not the most modern thing in the world. This particular version cost me £47.50, which is obviously much cheaper than the new Dapol ones are going to be. They're priced at £135 something at the retailers, but obviously that's not quite comparing apples to apples. So let's get this out and find out exactly what this one's going to be like. And incidentally, I'm pretty sure Bachmann don't produce these anymore. I can't find any on the Bachmann website at least, and the retailers don't seem to have them. I think there's probably a really good reason for that because, as we're going to see when I get the instructions out, mechanically these are extremely dated to the point where I think Bachmann would have to redesign them mechanically in order for them to fit into the 2020 marketplace. Hence, there are none on offer at the moment, so if you want to get one of these, and I'm not really sure I recommend that, you need to go second hand. I think that's basically the way to go. Anyway, if we take a look at the front of the box, you can see we have a photo of one of the real engines on the front there. It's in a BR lined green. Well, that's not actually what is inside the box in Bachmann's usual style. If we take a look at the label on the end, you can see that this is product code 31-829. It's a 43XX number 4331, Great Western, fully lined, 1914. Is that the date? Possibly. So I specifically went for this one because this is the early Great Western green, which is fully lined and absolutely beautiful. I don't think Dapol are doing that particular version. The Great Western versions that I've seen from Dapol have all been unlined, and if you want to get a lined one, you have to get a BR variant. So that is something to bear in mind. Possibly Dapol will produce a Great Western lined variant at some point. But either way, let's get to this one then. So there's nothing really to see on the box, just some, well, warnings it looks like on the back. So I will get straight to opening this up and we will take a look at this. So, probably opened it at the wrong end now. And let's take a look. I'm going to take a look as well and see if I can spot any dates on the paperwork. I don't think there is any, if I remember correctly. Anyway, so we have the card here with the photo on it, of course, which is lovely. On the back of there, we have a line drawing of the class as well as a brief history. So I'll try and get that into shot so that you can pause it and read it if you'd like to. But as always, I will give you some history in a second. Then if I open up this little card, you can see we've got some paperwork. I will just pull this out and show you the mechanism. So if you take a look there, you can see that this is a dreaded split chassis mechanism, which not only means that you've got all those possible axle failures, which so often happens with these split chassis models, it also means that these are not DCC ready. There's no socket or anything like that. And if you wanted to chip these with DCC, you've got an awful lot of work to do, not to mention the fact that there's a very little space inside the loco. So yeah, very dated mechanism, not my favourites, but they do tend to run okay, provided they haven't failed. So yes, that's something to consider. However, there she is. As you can see, it looks absolutely beautiful, and I was really glad to get a Great Western green version. Right, let me grab the detail bag then, which is quite awkward to grab, but I've got it. Okay, so there we go. Not a lot in there really. You've just got the brake rigging for both loco and tender, and it looks like a vacuum pipe as well. I don't know if that's a spare or not, because it appears that the loco and tender already have one fitted, or perhaps the tender doesn't. So the loco's got one, tender hasn't. How strange. But you can fit one if you want. That's the crucial thing. Right, well, let's grab the tender first, which I must admit looks beautiful, doesn't it? So as you can tell, there's no electrical connection between loco and tender. They're not connected in any way. You have at least got metal wheels on the tender, and the paintwork on this looks absolutely gorgeous, doesn't it? But we'll take a closer look at this in a little while. But as you can see, yeah, a good looking tender, if not the most modern in terms of its features. Let's grab the loco then, shall we? And yeah, this is not bad at all, is it? So there we go. As you can see, this thing looks beautiful, doesn't it? I mean, I think it's probably the livery that does it for me, but also as a mogul, it's got a really quite attractive shape, hasn't it? And for the age, to say this is, well, approximately anyway, don't know for sure, but approximately 20 years old, hang on, I'll put the tender with it, it doesn't look terrible, does it? I mean, if we look up close, as we're going to in a moment, you start to see a few of the cracks, and I mean that literally. But generally speaking, just looking at it from any sort of distance, it looks just fine, doesn't it? So, yeah, very interesting to see how the Dapol version is going to compare with this. No doubt it's going to be better, though, of course. But that's not all, folks. Let me pop this down, because I have a second one as well. I don't think this one has a box, annoyingly. At least, I don't think it does. But this one is a BR Unlined version, which is exactly the same model as far as I can tell, just in a slightly different livery. So I thought I would show you a bit of that today as well. And it does have a few features on it that the previous lined version doesn't have. And the lined version has a few features that this doesn't have, which is quite interesting because it shows how Bachmann have tried to improve this model, or how they did try to improve it back when they were producing it. So here's a little bit of history, and then we'll get on to some of the various details. So the 43XX was also known as the Great Western 4300 class, and these were really quite numerous. 342 of them were built over 21 years between 1911 and 1932, which makes the sort of first batches at least very much pre-grouping. And they were designed for mixed traffic duties, of course. Now, the class was designed to utilise standard parts used in previous Churchwood locomotives, including the same cylinders as the Saint class, the same wheels as the 5100 class, which are the large prairies, and Churchwood's standard number 4 boiler. As you can imagine, these were extremely successful, hence why so many of these were produced. Withdrawal began in the late 1930s when parts were reused for the New Grange and Manor classes. The rest began to be withdrawn just after nationalisation in 1948, although some did survive until 1964. In total, though, only 2 survive in preservation. Okay, so there she is up close and personal for you, number 4331, looking pretty excellent, I must say. And while I do really like this, and I'm perfectly happy with this for 50 quid, I mean, for 50 quid you can't go wrong, and I think I even paid a bit less than that. It is, though, easy to imagine how Dapol might improve on this for their 2020 version of the model. We've already talked about the mechanism. Obviously, the chances of the new Dapol model coming out and having a split chassis model are pretty much nil, but there are other ways as well. So let's take a look at some of the details. The paintwork, first of all, is not bad, don't get me wrong. I think this is a great effort, obviously, for a model that is as old as it is. But if we take a close look at the lining, you can see that it doesn't quite have the mechanical accuracy that we would expect from a model in 2020, but it certainly isn't too bad. On the top, though, it's a bit more noticeably dodgy, isn't it? Arguably the most important part as well, the top, because we look down on our models, don't we? But it's got this really ugly seam line which goes right from the front of the cab to the back of the smoke box. Very, very noticeable on that. And in fact, every 43XX I've seen from Bachmann is quite similar in that regard. And as you can see, they've had quite a job painting over that big ridge there. In other areas, though, more simple areas such as the side of the cab, which is a more flat surface, the lining has been applied much, much better. And also you can see you've got the nicely applied running number there, 4331, not an etch plate or anything like that, but it's not so bad. And we've also got a metal wire handrail on the side of the cab, which is not a bad feature, actually. And there are 1 or 2 quite nice features. It's got sprung buffers. Would you look at that? That's really crazy. So that's not bad. Quite interestingly, my unlined BR green one, which I think is slightly older, does not have sprung buffers, which suggests that Bachmann did improve that over the course of the model. And there's a few other features. If we look at the lined version again, you can see that the coupling rods and the valve gear and such, well, no valve gear, but yeah, just the coupling and connecting rods, you can see that they've got quite realistic high shine finish. Whereas the old one just looks more dated. It's a more muted, matty sort of finish, which I don't think looks quite as good. So they obviously did make some improvements. One feature that I do like, possibly due to the way that these have been constructed, is the fact that you cannot see the ends of the axles because the sort of spokes are entirely plastic. They're a big plastic piece. The end of the axle is completely hidden, which looks fantastic. Now, looking at photos of the new Dapol version, or at least the sample, I should say, those don't look quite as good. You can clearly see the ends of the axles there, which isn't dreadfully realistic. So maybe there are one or two areas that the Bachmann version beats Dapol on. But as you can tell, it's still not really up to modern standards. For instance, just underneath the boiler here in front of the firebox, you can clearly see a large portion of the metal chassis block there, which is not a feature you'd expect on a modern loco, so I'm hoping that Dapols won't have anything like that. Underneath the boiler, you can also just see the two halves of the split chassis, which, yeah, looks a little bit basic. Maybe a 2020 model of the Great Western Mogul would have some valve gear represented under there. I don't know for sure whether it does or not, but that would be pretty good to see. And that really brings us on to the materials. Obviously, most of the body here is made of plastic, even the running board, which is unusual for Bachmann locos these days, but once again, as an older one, that's pretty much what you'd expect. But because it's got that big chunky chassis on the inside, which fills the body essentially, it's not particularly light. This weighs in at 213 grams, which is quite a lot, and it's closer to 300 grams with the tender. So whether or not Dapols will be heavier or not, I'm not entirely sure, but who cares as long as it's a good puller, I suppose. Now, some of the other details are a little bit on the basic side. We've got this whistle in front of the cab here, which is plastic and painted. Not terribly convincing is that. We've also got the safety valve bonnet there, which doesn't look too bad. It is just a plastic piece. Obviously, painted plastic doesn't quite look as good as real metal, but it isn't terrible, it must be said. And around the front, if we take a look at the smoke box door, you can see that part of the dart, at least, appears to be separately fitted, but the back part, at the very least, is just a part of the moulding. And something about the detail on the smoke box just looks a little bit chunky, as does the detail on the running board. As you can tell, those lamp irons, while I'm sure they're pretty sturdy as a result of their chunkiness, they're not exactly that realistic, are they? I do quite like the buffer beams though. As you can see, we've got the painted details on there as well as the various different vacuum fittings, which looks pretty good. The cylinders too have been nicely painted. I didn't mention that, but that looks pretty good. The cab though is an extremely basic area on this model. As you can tell, we don't have any glazed windows, which I don't think would go down very well these days. And inside there's very, very little painted detail. In fact, most of the cab there is just unpainted black plastic. There is the sort of brake lever here, which has been painted into the red, which is interesting, but besides that, yeah, it's a far cry from modern cabs. Interestingly, my older, presumably older, unlined version does have a fully painted cab. That could have been from the factory, but I think that's more likely to have been done by a previous owner. But either way, quite interesting to see how that cab looks once it's been painted up. But yeah, definitely I would imagine any new release from Dapol to have a fully detailed cab, which obviously would be way, way better. Another thing that I really don't like about this one is the front bogie. Now, from this angle, it looks absolutely fine, but if I get a shot of it from underneath, you can see those front wheels are literally just held in place by a cheap bit of plastic, a thin bit of plastic, which invariably breaks, by the way. I've seen lots of examples of these with a broken plastic retainer on those front wheels. And in fact, my unlined version, as you can see, no longer has that. It came off while I was just cleaning the front wheels because it was so flimsy and I had to make a sort of bodgy repair. So that's certainly not very good. I would expect a better solution from a more expensive model like that. Okay, let's take a look at the tender. Now, whether it was just easier to paint the tender or whether they, I don't know, spent extra time on it or whatever, you can clearly see though that the lining is way, way better on the tender. In fact, if you showed me that tender in isolation, I would say, yeah, that is a modern loco. That looks perfect. So the application on the tender is superb. Although still some of the details are a little bit on the chunky side. These handrails appear to be plastic and not wire, and as a result they're a little bit on the chunky side. The coal in the top is also very, very large scale, not really what we're used to on modern locos. Obviously that's not the end of the world because you could cover that with your own crushed coal or take it out entirely. Although it's not removable, you would have to cut it out. So yeah, bit of a scary job that. You have got quite a few controls on the front of the tender there, which look pretty good. They're pretty finely detailed for the age, although none of it is painted. So once again, if you wanted to enhance that yourself, you've got a bit of work to do. As I say, it does have metal wheels, which look pretty good and realistic. I like the fact that the outer parts are metal, but the sort of spokes and that appear to be plastic, which gives them a more dulled down appearance. Whether that's more realistic or not, I'm probably not qualified to say. But just looking at it without knowing much about the prototype, it looks pretty decent, doesn't it? And also under there, you can see we do have the scoop, water scoop there, which is a nice inclusion actually on an older model. Around the back you can see more lining, more sprung buffers, and what looks like a NEM coupling. It is a slim sort of tension lock, however it is not, so that's a final drawback really. You can't exchange the couplings, at least not with NEM couplings, which I would expect to be very different on any model produced this year. So like I say, yes, lots and lots of areas that Dapple can improve on with their model, and actually looking at this, as good as this is, it makes me excited to see what Dapple will have come up with theirs. I've seen the samples, but obviously I've not held one or looked closely at one yet. So yeah, really looking forward to that. So now let's talk a bit about performance. I'm sure you can guess quite easily what's coming, but it's got to be done. So let's get these down onto the track and give them a little try. Okay, so there is the lovely Great Western 43XX by Bachmann down onto the track, ready to have her little test then. So we've already talked quite a lot about the mechanism. You know I'm not a fan of the split chassis mechanism. A brief rundown of it is obviously the axles tend to fail, no proper bearings in the wheel set of course, 3-pole motors, and generally speaking no tender pickups and no facility for DCC straight out of the box. So not absolutely amazing. However, the performance of them generally, provided they haven't failed, is not too bad, I would say. So the pulling force of this one wasn't too bad, 0.24 newtons I measured on this. More context on that coming later when I tell you how many coaches it can manage. But let's try the slow speed and see what this is like. As I say, it has only got a 3-pole motor, so I'm not expecting an amazing crawl by any means. So let me turn it up and we will see. This is second hand, by the way, but has been thoroughly serviced. So as you can see, yeah, horrible mechanism, but not a bad crawl. It's pretty slow. It's not particularly smooth, it must be said, although it does get smoother, of course, as you turn it up. Yeah, as you can see, a little bit juddery, but as I keep going up, you can see that it does get going in the end. That's not too bad. Right, let's go back, see if it'll do one backwards, get it into shot again. Right, ready? Oh, yeah, it needed a bit more juice going backwards, and then once it started, it sort of went a bit too quick. Let's try that again. Leave it there, look. So yeah, it's not terrible, it's not brilliant, it's not up to modern standards by any means, but to be honest, if you want a cheap loco that performs reasonably well but doesn't cost the earth, this is not a bad contender, although if you want to DCC fit them, it can be done, but it's not very pleasurable. There we are, look. Seems to have stalled the motor there. It is still running though, look, if I give it a bit of help. Yes, just a bit of a sore spot there, I think, in the motion. But yeah, not too bad, and at a higher speed, it is a little bit on the noisy side because there's no bearings, so yeah, quite a lot of rattling around going on, but yeah, reasonably good. And as I say, not too bad when it comes to pulling power either. So speaking of pulling, I have set up 5 Cornish Riviera coaches, which I think look lovely with any Great Western loco. They are mixed traffic engines, so I think it's quite all right to put them with some, with some coaches. So let's get to it then. Let's see if she can couple nicely. Go on, go for it. And it should be able to manage these, hopefully. Ooh, yes, it zapped some of her torque though, did you see that? Speed dropped right down when she touched those. But that's not too bad, let's see how it goes. Might need to turn it up a bit more though. But let's give it a shot. There it goes. So yeah, with relative ease, it's managed that, which is good to see. And then on the middle line, as you've probably guessed, I have the other 43XX. I thought since they're both mixed traffic engines, one can do goods and the other can do passenger. So here comes the goods one. This has got some of the siphon Gs, I think they are, or are they Hs? I think they're Gs. So that looks all right. As you can see, just 4 of those, so quite an easy load for her to manage, really. And then on the inside line, I have another sort of old-timey Great Western loco, and that's the theme of today's running session, by the way. So let me know which other old-fashioned Great Western locos you can spot alongside the layout. And of course, as always, there is an odd one out. But here's this loco. This is the 2800 class, similar sort of era, of course, to the 43XX with a little bit of a goods train. So let's catch up now with the Great Western lined green one, see how it's getting on with Gordon's Hill. Here we go then. So yeah, not a tremendous amount of power behind this one, to be honest, but will it slow down very much up this incline, which is only very slight? No, I wouldn't say so. No, can't really say that slowed down very much, if at all. So yeah, it's not too bad. I think it's reasonably capable of hauling a prototypical load, which is always good to see. So let me know what you think to these. Would you buy one? That will be the poll question. I think the answer for me would still be yes. You wouldn't buy one with high expectations, but if you pay little enough for them, yes, they're a good buy. And in that livery, of course, quite difficult to resist. Alright, so here are some of my ratings then for the Bachmann 43XX. So I've given the level of detail just a 2-star there. It's possibly a little bit unfair to compare this against locos produced these days, but they've all got to go against the same categories, haven't they? So it is what it is. Yeah, no painted cab, lots of chunky details. Not dreadfully realistic overall, but not bad certainly for the money I paid for it. The performance isn't too bad at all. It's not that great at doing a slow crawl, partly because it doesn't have a 5-pole motor. But besides that, yeah, it's reasonably strong, it's reasonably smooth. It's not going to win any awards for smoothness, but it does the job, and it's not dreadfully noisy either. So yeah, performance is okay. The hauling capabilities aren't too bad. As you can see, power here, 17 coaches, that's what I've calculated these should manage on a straight and level track. Not too bad for the size, but then of course there are locos. I mean, that J72 I looked at from Bachmann, that could manage 16 coaches, and of course it was way smaller. But yeah, it's not terrible. The mechanism though has to be a 2-star. Pretty sure these are running just 3-pole motors, no proper bearings, split chassis, no tender pickups. Yeah, it's extremely basic stuff where the mechanism's concerned. Same goes really with the quality. I can't ever give a loco a 5-star quality when it's got a split chassis mechanism because the axles do have a tendency to fail. There's also loads of plastic on this. Most of it is just a plastic construction. It's only really the chassis that's made of metal. Besides that, I suppose it's reasonably sturdy if I had to say something positive, which is why it's not lower than 3 stars. Value though, now unfortunately I don't know what the RRP for these would have been. They're not for sale anymore, as I've said. So I'm going to have to rate this based on what I paid, which is just less than 50 quid. And that must be said, even though it's not an amazing model, for less than 50 quid, it's not too bad at all. Overall then, that is 6.43 out of 10. Yes, it does seem quite low, but don't forget this is a 20-year-old model at a guess. Into the logbook it goes there. There we go, third, just below the rust and shunter. Yeah, not terrible, but think twice about buying one if you're considering it. Ah, 2800 class perfectly ruined that shot. Thank you, sir. Oh, and again, that 280's been a real joker today. So there you have it, folks. It's an engine that you probably shouldn't like. It's one that I feel as though I'm a bit stupid liking. But yeah, it's got a bit of charm to it, hasn't it? It's not what I would call the most reliable sort of build in the world. But like I say, for the money, it's difficult to complain, isn't it, really? So overall, yeah, quite pleased with this one. And I've had it a little while, and I've always really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I hope you enjoyed seeing a slightly older engine for a change. I do like to do this once in a while, so please excuse it if you really can't stand the old ones. But for the time being, thank you for your company, thanks for watching, and I will see you very soon with something different and probably something a bit more modern. Alright folks, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you on the next one.